defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network Team Autopsy Report. Folks, this is one that will conclude our series for the Power 4 teams, 67 down, 1 to go. So we're going to take our time through this one just a little bit. So in this episode, we have the Ohio State Buckeyes on the autopsy table. Now, we're going to, for this part of the exercise, exclude their playoff run, which did culminate in a national championship. So we're strictly looking at this team from what they did in the regular season. So that is what the final grade will be based on, not so much the playoffs. Want to make sure all our Buckeye fans get that disclaimer right off the top of the bat. So if you're watching on YouTube or streaming this on our Twitter handle at CrunchTime VIP, thank you so much for joining us. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, want to say thank you for joining us as well. And for our podcast listeners, anything that I reference on the screen, don't worry, I got you covered with all of that information. So let's start there with the head coach, Ryan Day. Finally got the national championship gorilla off of his back, winning a national title. But let's take a look at this coach's record in his first 7 years there in Columbus. 80 games coached, 70 wins, 10 losses. So you're talking about 70 wins in his first 80 games. 80, let's round it up, 88% winning percentage. Ron Day has done a phenomenal job there as the head coach there of the Buckeyes. No disputing that. In all of the seasons where we've played a full complement of games, This coach has found a way to get double-digit wins in all of those seasons where we've played a full complement of games. Now, let's take a look at the betting breakdown, and then we'll get into some other advanced data here. So the Buckeyes had a season win total of 10.5. If you took that over, you did not get a chance to go to the pay window with that Buckeyes season win total in pocket. So fell short there of that expectation. And when we look at this team through our composite win total, our in-season win total of 3 very unique but highly predictive data points as far as how a team's win-loss record should shake out during the end of the season, we were pretty much spot on with this team, 9.8. So a 10-win team, exactly where they ended up during the regular season there. So they did nudge past our in-season composite win total by getting to that 10-win mark. But when you're sitting at a 9.8, that's pretty much spot on there. So that's a data point to look at. Now, let's talk about their schedule. And 2 different things that we look at when we're looking at these teams' schedule. First of all, is your strength of schedule. How difficult was your schedule from a power ranking standpoint? And then the second part of the equation is your strength of record. Basically, that looks at your opponent's win-loss percentage there. Now, your strength of record, you absolutely have no control over. Same can be said for most of your schedule. When you play in a conference like the Big Ten, where now we have these overexpanded conferences, you really don't get a true apples to apples as far as one team's schedule to another. The only part of your schedule you can control is your non-conference. So that's roughly about 20, in some conferences, about 25% of your schedule. So that's something to keep in mind. Now let's take a look at the Buckeyes. 0.470 out of 134 teams in college football last season at the Division I level. The Buckeyes had the 38th toughest schedule. Now, when we look at their strength of record, basically their opponent's winning percentage, 0.583. That was 31st out of 134 teams. So this team faced a good, not great schedule based on that SOS and SOR measurement. So not saying that they played a bunch of cupcakes. It was just not as difficult as you would expect in a power conference like the Big Ten. And in this first slide, we're going to explain why we come to that conclusion. You take a look at Ohio State's opponents and their win-loss record. Akron was 4-8. Western Michigan was 6-6. Marshall was 9-3. You notice no Power 4 teams on the non-conference. Now, Michigan State, once we get into conference play, 5-7. The Iowa Hawkeyes were 8-4. Oregon was 12-0. Nebraska 6-6. Penn State was 11-1. Purdue 1-11. Northwestern 4-8. America's team in Indiana was 11-1. And then, of course, ending the regular season with Michigan, who finished the regular season 7-5. Now, as far as playing the upper tier teams in the conference, got to give Ohio State this for the way it lined up. So their in-conference schedule absolutely lifted up that strength of schedule, because they did face the 3 best teams as far as record goes in the conference in Oregon, Penn State, and Indiana. All 3 of those teams made the college football playoffs. Rest of that schedule is extremely lighter as far as the win-loss category goes. Now, got to give the Buckeyes credit for this as well. Looks like 4 of their opponents were power ranked inside of our top 25. All of those in conference. You look at the power rankings for their opponents out of conference. Marshall was 60th. Akron, 118th. Western Michigan, 108th in our power rankings. Just giving you some context here. Now, as far as the two games that I looked at here, trying to see if there's a really narrow win that the Buckeyes got that really kind of pushed them over. If you had to point to one game that they won from a data standpoint that could have been close, it would have been that Penn State game. But going back and rewatching that game, the right team won that game, absolutely. Penn State just missed opportunities as far as being able to knock off Ohio State, and that loss would have absolutely kept Ohio State out of the playoffs. So great job there by that team getting that victory. Now, let's take a look at the quality of defenses this Ohio State Buckeye team faced in the regular season. And we're going to use a baseline number of 68 because that's how many Power 4 teams we had in college football. So all the teams inside of that top 68, Michigan State was 63rd. Iowa was 22nd. Oregon had the 10th best power ranked defense for us last year. Nebraska was 14th. Penn State was 19th. Indiana was 27th. And then Michigan was 21st. You're looking at 7 of Ohio State's opponents' defenses ranked inside of that top 68. Now, here's the rub. 4 of their opponents were ranked outside of the top 80. Marshall was 85th. Akron was 106. Western Michigan was 114th. And Purdue, the 117th power ranked defense for us last year. So you're going to see that average number for the Buckeyes get dragged down because of those 4 opponents outside of the top 80. You're talking about an average opponent defensive ranking of 56. To put that in context, a team with the 56th power ranked defense is probably struggling to make a bowl game. They're probably about 6-6. Now, let's take a look at the offense for the Buckeyes from a statistical breakdown. We're going to start, and I'm going to give you 3 numbers here. I'm going to give you the NCAA average in that category. I'm going to give you the Buckeyes accounting stat number for that category, and then finally our adjusted number for that category. So average team last season scored about 28 points per game. Buckeyes, 35.5. When we adjust for opponent, does tick up a little bit more to 36.6. So this scoring offense was just a tick better than their accounting stats number. So good job there. Average team passing yards per game, 227 yards per game. Buckeyes were at 254. When we adjust for opponent, that ticks up a little bit, about 12 more yards to 267 yards per game passing. Now, the run game, average team last season, 160 yards per game. Ohio State, 169. However, when we adjust for opponent, that actually goes up a little bit further to about 188 yards per game. So this ground game was even a little bit better than what they were from a statistical standpoint. So total offense per game, 387 yards per game was the average. Ohio State was at 424 during the regular season. We actually had this offense about 31 yards better at 454 yards per game. So phenomenal job there. Now let's dig deep into the advanced analytics here. Average team last season, drives ending with a score, either a touchdown or field goal, 40%. Ohio State, 55.8%. Well over 1 out of every 2 of your drives ending with either a touchdown or field goal. Now, here's how you average 35 points per game. The average team last season, drives ending with a touchdown, was 29%. Ohio State was 18 percentage points better at 47%. That's how you score over 35 points per game. You're not just getting field goals, you're getting touchdowns at the end of those drives. Phenomenal job there. And then finally, third down conversion. Average team was about 39% last season. Ohio State just a little bit better at 41.9%. So almost 3 percentage points better than the average team last year. Great job by that offensive line. Despite losing 2 starters during the regular season, in the center and the left tackle. This offensive line was well coached, and you could see that when losing 2 of your 5 starters and you're still not giving up a ton of sacks, that is a great job there by that offensive line, by the offensive line coach. And you got to give some credit to the quarterback there by not taking sacks. So great job all the way around. Just 16 sacks during the regular season allowed. To put that in context, that's 8 fewer than what the average team gave up last season. This team also did a great job of not turning the ball over. 13 turnovers in the regular season. Phenomenal job there. Now, when we look at our 3 E's, how effective, explosive, and efficient was your offense last year? You can expect that after the eye-popping numbers and the adjustments that I gave you, that Ohio State would finish very high in all of those categories. Absolutely. Effective offense, Ohio State was 5th. They were 5th in efficiency. They were 3rd in explosiveness. Ohio State ended the regular season as our 3rd ranked offense in all of college football last year. Now, let's talk quickly about some of the key contributors there for the Buckeyes. You got to start right there with the quarterback. Will Howard, transfer quarterback from Kansas State, in 16 games last season. That includes the playoffs and the regular season. 16 games, completed 73% of his passes for a tick over 4,000 yards. This is kind of where I like to see this number here. 35 passing touchdowns, 10 INTs. Will Howard was throwing an interception less than 1 per game, so did a great job of taking care of the ball. In that 3.5 touchdown to INT ratio, that is something that absolutely gets you noticed by my guys at the NFL level. 251 yards per game, passing 9.5 yards per attempt, 13 yards per completion. This is telling me, folks, that Will Howard was absolutely pushing the ball down the field, and why not with some of those wide receivers that they have there in Columbus. You're talking about Carnell Tate. You're talking about Emeka Egbuka, who just recently got drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and of course the freshman phenom, JJ there. Man, you absolutely have to love how this young man in Jeremiah Smith performed as a freshman. 76 receptions, over 1,300 yards, 15 touchdowns, over 82 yards receiving per game. That is phenomenal work there by that young man there, and it's going to be an absolute treat watching him for the next couple of years. Let's take a look at the defense and see if the defense faced a much stiffer test than their offense did. And the answer would be categorically no. Let's walk through it. Once again, we're going to stick with that baseline number of 68. And if you're watching on YouTube, if you're looking at this on Twitter, you can absolutely see where some of Ohio State's opponents finished last year. I'm going to go through the ones that just finished inside of the top 68 first. You count them out with me. Marshall, 68th, barely hit the cut line. Iowa was 30th. Oregon was 11th from an offensive standpoint, from a power ranking standpoint. Nebraska, 67th. Penn State was 48th. And then the final team that this Ohio State team during the regular season faced that was inside of the top 68 was America's team in Indiana. They finished 3rd. That's 6 opponents in the regular season that finished inside of the top 68. Now, count with me the number of teams that finished outside of the top 80. Akron was 116th in offensive power rankings. Western Michigan, 86th. Michigan State was 103rd. Purdue was 108th. And then Northwestern was 101st in that category. So 5 of their opponents were outside of that top 80. So you're looking at an average offensive ranking of 68. This would have been a team that would have probably been, you're talking about an offense that struggles to put up points. You're talking about an offense that's probably 4-8. Best case scenario, 5-7. So during the regular season, it's fair to say that Ohio State did not face a really good number of offenses last year. And that's despite facing 2 teams that were inside of the top 15 there in Oregon and for Indiana. That's not to discredit Ohio State's defense. That's just saying from a week in and week out standpoint, they weren't tested nearly enough during the regular season. Now, let's get to their defensive numbers. And once again, I'm just going to give you Ohio State's accounting stat number in that category and then our adjusted number. So the Buckeyes during the regular season allowed 10.9 points per game. When we adjust that number, we come up with 10 points per game. So you're not going to lose a lot of games when you're giving up just 10 points per game. Phenomenal job there by former defensive coordinator, now Jim Knowles, and all of those veteran players there for the Buckeyes on defense. Passing yards per game allowed, 144 yards per game passing. When we look at that from an adjusted standpoint, 141. So right there with their number. Now, the rush defense. This rush defense was elite. 97 yards per game allowed. Now, when we adjust for opponent, that does tick up about 16 yards to 113 yards per game. Now, total offense by their opponents per game, 241 yards per game. When we adjust for opponent, that does tick up about 12 yards to 254 yards per game. Still elite numbers in all of those categories. Now, here's some eye-popping elite numbers for you. And folks, this tells you how good this team was regardless of who they were facing. Ohio State's opponents' drives ending with a score, either touchdown or field goal, just 17.4%. Folks, that's almost 20 percentage points better than the average team last year. Same can be said with their opponents' drives ending with a touchdown. 9.6 of their opponents' drives last season during the regular season ended with a touchdown. That's elite numbers there. And then third down conversions, their opponents converted an adjusted 33.4%. So fantastic numbers in all three of those categories. And this Ohio State team got after the opposing quarterback quite a bit there. 53 sacks there for Ohio State. Fantastic job there of being able to pressure the quarterback. And when you have to lead as much as Ohio State did last season, you just take the chains off and you tell those edge rushers to go hunt. And boy, did they ever. This team also did a great job of getting off the field on fourth downs. Their opponents attempted 33 fourth down conversions, only converted 15 of those, 46%. 7 percentage points better than the average team last year. Now, a number that you would have liked to see improve a little bit more was the turnovers. Ohio State forced 17 turnovers. Typically, when you're sacking the quarterback that many times, you want to see those edge rushers and defensive linemen try to punch that ball out from the quarterback from behind and not just generate a negative play, but generate a turnover. That's not a critique. That's not a criticism. That's just something that I've known great defensive coordinators talk about. When you have a chance to hit that quarterback from behind, you're trying to force that ball out. Think of Derek Thomas there with the Kansas City Chiefs. Think of Bruce Smith there with the Buffalo Bills. Some of the greatest pass rushers in our day, Lawrence Taylor with the New York Giants. They weren't just looking to get the sack. They were looking to get the ball out and get that possession for their offense. So that's something that I would have loved to see from Ohio State in the regular season. Let's talk about the 3 E's as far as their defense. Again, expect this to be extremely high. 9th best effective defense in college football last season. 2nd best in not giving up explosive plays, and number 1 in defensive efficiency. Ohio State ended with the 3rd best, or I should say the 3rd ranked defense for us in college football last year. So top 3 offense, top 3 defense. That's how you get into the playoffs and do some damage. And that's what they exactly did. Let's talk about the field goal and special teams. This team was about average during the regular season, 77% field goal conversion rate. That's right around where the average was last year. Now, where this team struggled on special teams was the punt game. 41 yards per punt, average yards per punt. That was good for 96. So you want to see that special teams be a weapon. Find a punter that can absolutely flip the field when you're not scoring points, and then set that defense up for short field, and then you get a chance to do some real damage to your opponent. +4 in the turnover differential. We like that. Here's something that I'm going to be very complimentary on Ryan Day about. This team did not make a lot of dumb penalties. 4.3 penalties per game. That's about a 1.5 fewer than the average team last year, and just 40 yards in penalties. That's almost 13 fewer yards in penalties than the average team last year. So from a discipline standpoint, you like to see that from elite teams trying to compete for championships, that they're not beating themselves with dumb penalties. Good job there by Coach Day. Now, speaking of Coach Day, let's talk about the record here in these high-pressure situations. In one-score games last year, Ryan Day was 2-2, 50% against quality opponents. 4 wins, 2 losses. Now, for the Buckeyes, both of those losses came in the regular season, did not come into the postseason. So, good job there. And then as far as being aggressive on fourth downs last year, Ryan Day, 16.4%. That would have ranked 32nd out of 144 qualifying head coaches last year in Division I. And rightfully so to be aggressive when you're converting at a 71% clip, 28 attempts, 20 conversions. I wouldn't mind going for it on fourth down if I'm converting at over a 70% clip there. So absolutely wise decision there in those fourth down decisions. Now let's take a look at the offensive split here for the Buckeyes. As far as in the 14 games that they won, and these will include the playoffs, and then the 2 games that they lost in the regular season. So in those 14 victories, Ohio State was averaging a tick below 38 points per game. Folks, you're not going to lose a lot of games when you're scoring that many points. The passing game, 265 yards per game, passing on 28 attempts, 9.6 yards per attempt, 13.3 yards per completion. That is phenomenal work there. Like I said, when your offensive line is protecting your quarterback, he feels comfortable in pushing the ball down the field and trusting those playmakers. Absolutely what that data point shows me. 34 rushing attempts per game in those victories to 175 yards, 5.1 yards per rushing attempt. Great job by those 2 talented running backs there in Travion Henderson and Quinshawn Junkins. Both of them went over 1,000 yards last year. Now, needed the playoffs to get there, but when you have 2 running backs to get over 1,000 yards, both averaging over 5 yards per rushing attempt, and both hitting double digits as far as touchdowns, that is phenomenal work there. And credit goes to the offensive line first and foremost. Ohio State was 44% on third down conversions in those victories, 68% conversion rate on fourth downs, and just committed 9 turnovers during the regular season there. Now, in the 2 losses, offense struggled a little bit from an overall average standpoint, just 20.5 points per game in those 2 defeats. The passing game, not bad, 251 yards per game on 34 attempts. So 6 more attempts, but the yardage comes down about 14 yards per game. So now we're looking at 7.5 yards per passing attempt, just 10.7 yards per completion. The ground game struggled somewhat. 30 attempts for now just 109 yards. So 66 fewer yards rushing in those 2 losses. Just 3.7 yards per rushing attempt. Ohio State was about 36% conversion rate on third downs, 75% on fourth downs. In those 2 losses, they only attempted 4 fourth down attempts, so converted 3 of them, and did have 4 total turnovers in those 2 losses. So we can see when this team lost games last year, offense just really didn't contribute to that high octane level that we had seen in the rest of the games that they played last year. Let's take a look at the defense here. In those 14 victories, folks, 11.5 points per game, 162 yards per game passing allowed on 28 attempts, 5.8 yards per attempt, 9.7 yards per completion. Their opponent's ground game was absolutely shut down and the faucet turned off with a padlock, 77 yards per game on 33 rushing attempts. That's 2.4 yards per rushing attempt. Their opponents could not run the ball whatsoever. So their teams were absolutely one-dimensional there against Ohio State in those 14 victories. 31% complete conversion rate on third downs, 39% on fourth downs were their opponents. Forced 15 turnovers in those contests during the regular season only. In their 2 losses, defense still wasn't horrible, giving up 22.5 points per game. You can still win a lot of games giving up just basically 23 points per game. 202 yards per game passing on 25 attempts. So the attempts go down by 3, the yardage goes up by almost 40 yards in those 2 losses. 8.1 yards per attempt, 12.6 yards per completion. That's danger zone territory there. And then the run defense did not come up big for Ohio State in their 2 losses. 164 yards per game is what their opponents had in those 2 losses on 37 attempts. So the attempts go up by 4, but the yards per game goes up by 87, 4.5 yards per rushing attempt. So it was probably a culmination of body blows from that defense as far as the run game in those 2 losses. Their opponents converting 45% on third downs, but just 1 out of 3 on fourth downs there. Only forced 2 turnovers in those 2 losses. So defense did not play horribly there in those contests. All right, let's get to the final grade and the final verdict for Ohio State. And the Ohio State Buckeyes will get a final grade of an A- during the regular season. This team showed explosive offense, both from the run game and from the pass game. Will Howard, fantastic job. We know about the 2 losses there. We could call into question maybe a little bit of coaching decision in that game against Oregon on the road. And then, of course, losing for the 4th time in a row to Michigan. So that's why Ohio State gets an A- and not an A. Finishing the regular season with 10 wins, definitely deserves an A grade, absolutely, but not exceeding the betting win total in June did knock that grade down just a little bit. So the final verdict, Ohio State was absolutely a top-tier team during the regular season, but fell short in their biggest matchups during the season last year. Now, did get critical wins over Penn State and Indiana, which propelled them into the college football playoffs. But talking to Ohio State fans, would have absolutely loved to see that victory over Michigan, but getting into the playoffs was the priority. So, final thought as far as the final verdict goes. Needed to see a little bit more consistency from the quarterback and more red zone efficiency during the regular season were some of the notes that we had. Our final thought before we had the playoff seedings for the Buckeyes were, if this team plays complementary football, not turning the ball over, not letting the moment get too big for them, that they absolutely had an excellent opportunity to compete for college football playoffs. When we looked at a team that was ranked inside of the top 5, both from an offensive standpoint and a defensive standpoint, that was recipe for having success there in the college football playoffs. So just from a pure regular season standpoint, let's talk about what this team was and where we wanted to see them go. So we're going to spend a few minutes here talking about what we want to see from the 2025 Ohio State Buckeyes. We know that this team is losing a lot of talent, starting with the offensive coordinator in Chip Kelly, who is now the offensive coordinator with the Las Vegas Raiders in the NFL. Jim Knowles left to go to Penn State to be the defensive coordinator for James Franklin there. So first and foremost, stabilizing the coordinators both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. Now, this is going to require Ryan Day to not be as much of a CEO in 2025, but be a little bit more hands-on, especially with the offense and especially with the defense, because you're going to have not a lot of experience like you've had this past season. So stabilizing that first and foremost. Key number 2, who's going to step in as the quarterback? We understand that all our odds are looking like Julian Sayin will be the quarterback going into the 2025 season. This young man transferred from the University of Alabama when Nick Saban retired, and now is competing for that starting job for the Ohio State Buckeyes. So want to see how he steps in as a first-time starter with a first-time play caller there, because from what I understand, Ryan Day is not going to take back over offensive play calling duties. So that's going to be interesting there. Now, he's going to be throwing to 2 talented wide receivers there in Jeremiah Smith going into his sophomore year, and a big-time prove-it year for Carnell Tate as he looks to become the latest Ohio State Buckeye wide receiver to get drafted very high in the NFL draft. And then the final key, continue the defensive dominance, but while generating more takeaways. This was something that I talked about briefly here. I want to see this team get a little bit more aggressive with the takeaways. You've played phenomenal defense under Jim Knowles. We'll see how that changes with the new defensive coordinator. But what I want to see from Ohio State is I want to see a more aggressive approach in forcing opponents into turnovers, especially if you're going to be playing with a lead. You got to find a way to get that ball back to really kind of let your offense close out those contests. So that's something that I'm looking forward to seeing from Ohio State in 2025. If Ohio State can focus on these key areas, Ohio State can absolutely return to the college football playoffs and look to compete for another national title in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy